The rain felt like ice against my face as I stood on Montrose Harbor's pier, watching Michael's Range Rover disappear into the Chicago darkness. My hands trembled, not just from the cold seeping through my soaked coat, but from the terror that my 11 months of careful planning might not be enough to destroy the man who had systematically destroyed me. What if he's right? The thought crept in like poison. What if I really am losing my mind? What if I'm the unstable one, manufacturing evidence of crimes that exist only in my paranoid imagination? I gripped the recording device in my pocket tighter, its solid weight the only thing anchoring me to reality. Inside that small machine was Michael's voice, captured just 20 minutes earlier. Maybe a few hours alone by the lake will teach you to stop questioning financial decisions that are too complex for your artistic mind to comprehend, Victoria. Real wives support their husbands instead of creating problems where none exist. The words still burned. Not because they were cruel. I'd endured worse over the past 2 years, but because a part of me, the part Michael had carefully cultivated, whispered that maybe he was justified. Maybe I was too emotional, too suspicious, too ungrateful for the comfortable life he provided. I closed my eyes and forced myself to remember why I was standing in this storm. 11 months earlier, the bank statement had been sitting on Michael's desk when I brought him coffee that morning. I hadn't meant to look. I'd learned that snooping through his financial papers was a sign of my trust issues and paranoid tendencies. But the number was impossible to ignore. $127,000 transferred to MRP Consulting Services on a date when Michael had claimed we couldn't afford the $300 art supplies I'd requested. Michael, I'd said carefully, my voice pitched to sound curious rather than accusatory. I noticed a large transfer on your statement. What's MRP Consulting? His reaction had been swift and brutal. The coffee mug shattered against the kitchen wall behind my head. Are you fucking kidding me right now? His face transformed from sleepy contentment to cold fury in seconds. You're going through my private business documents. What's next? Victoria hiring a private investigator because you think I'm cheating? The accusation hit like a physical blow, because deep down, I had been wondering about the late nights, the weekend, client emergencies. The mysterious phone calls he took in another room. I wasn't snooping, I said, my voice getting smaller. It was just sitting there. It was sitting on my desk in my office because it's my business. He stepped closer, and I instinctively backed against the counter. MRP Consulting handles international currency exchanges for high-net-worth clients. The fact that you don't understand basic investment strategies doesn't make them suspicious. I should have recognized the pattern the way he shifted from explosive anger to condescending explanation, making me feel stupid for asking reasonable questions about our shared finances. Instead, I found myself apologizing. You're right, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have looked. No, you shouldn't have. His voice softened into that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. Sweetheart, you have many wonderful qualities, but financial sophistication isn't one of them. That's why I handle our money to protect you from stress you're not equipped to manage. He'd pulled me into his arms, then pressing my face against his chest so I couldn't see his expression. I know your art career hasn't been as successful as you hoped, and I understand that makes you feel insecure about contributing to our lifestyle. But taking out those insecurities on me isn't healthy for either of us. That conversation had ended with me apologizing for my jealousy and paranoia, promising to trust his expertise and thanking him for being patient with my emotional problems. But that night alone in my art studio, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I started writing down exactly what had happened word for word before Michael's gaslighting could make me doubt my own memories. Standing in the freezing rain 10 months later, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the evidence I'd systematically gathered. Photographs of bank statements showing transfers to accounts I'd never authorized. Recordings of Michael telling clients that offshore investments were completely legitimate, while emails on his computer revealed they were shell companies designed to hide stolen money. Videos of him bringing women to our home while I was visiting my mother. The most damning evidence was Michael's own words captured during his unguarded moments when he thought I was too emotionally fragile to understand what I was hearing. Phone conversations with his business partner about bleeding the old bitch Rodriguez dry before her family notices. Emails with his attorney discussing strategies to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could control my inheritance. My phone buzzed Daniel's text from his surveillance position at Navy Pier. "On my way. You did it, Vic. You actually fucking did it." As headlights approached through the storm, I thought about the woman I'd been 11 months ago. Someone who apologized for asking questions about her own money, who believed that suspicion was a character flaw, who had been systematically trained to doubt her own perceptions. That woman was drowning in Lake Michigan tonight, pulled under by the weight of gaslighting and financial control. The woman climbing into Daniel's warm car was someone else entirely, someone who had learned to trust her instincts, even when the person she loved most in the world told her those instincts were symptoms of mental illness. "Did you get everything?" Daniel asked, handing me a thermos of coffee and a dry towel. "Every word," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "He actually said that questioning his business decisions was proof I needed psychiatric evaluation." Daniel's jaw tightened. Our father had died when I was 16, and Daniel had stepped into that protective role with fierce dedication. Watching Michael systematically undermine my confidence had been torture for him. "So, Catherine's filing the emergency papers at 8 a.m., he said as we drove toward downtown Chicago. "By tomorrow afternoon, every account will be frozen and every asset will be under court protection. And if his lawyer finds a loophole, if the judge doesn't believe me, if Vic." Daniel's voice cut through my spiraling anxiety. "You documented everything. You have bank records, recordings, video evidence, witness testimony from his victims. Michael spent 2 years creating the perfect case against himself because he never imagined you were smart enough to gather evidence." As we drove through the storm, I pressed my face against the passenger window and watched Chicago's lights blur through the rain and my tears. Tomorrow would bring the most important fight of my life, not just for my financial security, but for my sanity, my future, and my fundamental right to trust my own perceptions. Michael Parker had made one crucial mistake. When he abandoned me in that storm, he'd assumed that breaking someone down was the same as destroying them. He was about to learn the difference. The Palmer House hotel room became my war room over the next 3 days. Room 847 registered under my maiden name, paid for with the secret credit card I'd opened 6 months earlier, when I realized Michael was monitoring every transaction on our joint accounts. I spread the evidence across the king-size bed like a general planning a campaign. Bank statements, printed emails, photographs, and 11 small recording devices containing hundreds of hours of Michael's unguarded cruelty. Each piece of evidence told part of a larger story about systematic financial abuse designed to isolate me from any means of independence or escape. The hotel's incident report filed the night of my abandonment documented my condition when I'd arrived. Guest appeared traumatized and disoriented, clothing soaked through, claimed to have been abandoned by spouse during severe weather. Desk clerk Rosa Martinez provided emergency assistance and documented guests' emotional distress. Perfect. Catherine had coached me on exactly how to establish the proper legal foundation for emergency protection orders. My phone rang. Sarah Chen from the gallery. "Victoria, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. These paintings you've been working on, they're not just art therapy, are they? They're documentation." Sarah was right. For the past year, I'd been painting my way through the psychological warfare Michael waged daily. Fractured Mirror showed a woman looking at her reflection, but the glass was cracked, distorting her image, a visual representation of how gaslighting destroys your ability to see yourself clearly. Silent Screams depicted a woman with her mouth taped shut while words like paranoid, emotional, and unstable swirled around her head in dark, oppressive colors. "These paintings could be powerful evidence in court," Sarah continued. "They show the psychological impact of abuse with an immediacy that legal documents can't capture." I hadn't considered using my art as evidence, but Sarah's suggestion made perfect sense. Michael had always dismissed my painting as a cute hobby that real collectors would never take seriously. The idea that my art might help destroy him had a certain poetic justice. "There's something else," Sarah said. "I showed your work to a collector yesterday, Dr. Rebecca Martinez from Northwestern Memorial. She wants to commission a series about recovery from domestic violence for their new trauma counseling center. A commission. Real money from my art, not the household allowance Michael doled out like payments to a child." "How much?" "15,000 for 5 paintings. Victoria, you could be financially independent within months if you continue building your portfolio." After Sarah hung up, I stared at my latest painting, The Unraveling, which showed chains breaking apart in golden sunlight. Michael had convinced me that my art was worthless because no serious collectors had shown interest. But I'd never actually tried to sell my work professionally, because Michael had systematically undermined my confidence. What else had he lied about? What other capabilities had he convinced me I didn't possess? My laptop chimed with an encrypted message from Isabella Chen, the forensic accountant Daniel had recommended. "Found the smoking gun. Can you meet tomorrow at 2 p.m. River North Starbucks? Bring everything." That evening, I returned to our Lincoln Park penthouse for the first time since the abandonment. Michael's Range Rover wasn't in the garage. He was probably staying at his downtown office, strategizing with his attorney about how to manage his unstable wife's latest episode. I moved through our home like a ghost, seeing it clearly for the first time in years. The expensive furniture Michael had chosen without consulting me. The art on the walls, all his selections, nothing I'd painted despite years of creating work I was secretly proud of. The bedroom where he'd brought at least 3 different women while I was away violating our bed while telling me I was paranoid for smelling unfamiliar perfume on the pillows. In his study, I sat at the desk where he'd manipulated me into signing documents I hadn't been allowed to read carefully. "Just routine financial paperwork, sweetheart. You don't need to worry about the details, that's what you have me for." I'd been signing away my inheritance, my legal rights, my access to accounts that should have been jointly controlled. Not because I was naive, but because Michael had systematically trained me to believe that understanding our finances was beyond my capabilities. The safe behind his desk was open. Michael had grown careless in his confidence that I was too emotionally unstable to pose a real threat. Inside were documents that made my hands shake. A psychiatric evaluation commissioned from Dr. Marcus Webb, a disgraced psychologist who specialized in providing fraudulent competency assessments for wealthy men seeking to control their wives' assets. The evaluation was dated 2 weeks ago, but I'd never met Dr. Webb. It claimed I showed clear signs of delusional paranoia regarding financial matters and recommended immediate intervention before subjects' accusations damage family relationships and business reputation. Michael had been planning to have me committed to a psychiatric facility while he seized control of my inheritance and art income. The commitment papers were already prepared, requiring only his signature and Dr. Webb's recommendation. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I had to take multiple shots to ensure they were clear. Then, I carefully returned the documents to their original positions. Walking through our bedroom, I opened Michael's jewelry drawer and found items I'd never seen before. Women's earrings, a gold bracelet that wasn't mine, a hotel keycard from the Fairmont dated last weekend, when Michael had claimed to be in Milwaukee on business. In his closet, expensive suits I'd never seen him wear. In his desk, business cards for luxury restaurants, where he'd apparently taken other women for romantic dinners, using money he'd told me was too tight to increase my monthly allowance. The scope of his deception was staggering. He hadn't just been stealing money, he'd been living multiple complete lives while convincing me that asking questions about discrepancies was a symptom of mental illness. As I prepared to leave, I heard Michael's key in the front door. My heart stopped. If he found me here, if he realized I'd been through his private papers, I slipped out through the service entrance, taking the back stairs to avoid the elevator, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain he could hear it through the walls. Only when I was safely in the taxi heading back to the Palmer house did I allow myself to breathe normally. That night, I painted until dawn, a new piece I called The Hunt. It showed a woman stalking through shadows, gathering evidence, preparing to strike. For the first time in years, I was painting from a position of power rather than victimhood. Michael thought he was hunting me, gradually closing traps that would leave me isolated, broke, and institutionalized. But predators make a crucial mistake when they underestimate their prey's intelligence and determination. The woman he'd been systematically breaking down had learned to fight back in ways he couldn't imagine. And tomorrow, Isabella Chen would show me just how devastating that fight was going to be. Isabella Chen looked like someone who'd spent years hunting white-collar criminals, sharp eyes behind designer glasses, perfectly organized files, and the contained energy of a predator who'd found an interesting target. She arrived at the River North Starbucks, carrying 2 laptops and a briefcase that would change my understanding of everything I thought I knew about my marriage. "Your husband is extraordinarily sophisticated," Isabella said without preamble, opening her laptop to display financial records that made my vision blur. "But sophisticated criminals make sophisticated mistakes, and Michael Parker has made several that will destroy him." The first spreadsheet showed transfers I'd never authorized, $127,000 to MRP Consulting, the mysterious transaction I'd questioned 11 months ago, $89,000 to something called International Currency Solutions, $203,000 to a cryptocurrency wallet registered under a false identity. The pattern started 3 years ago. Isabella explained, highlighting specific transactions with a laser pointer. Small amounts initially, testing whether you'd notice or question missing money. When you didn't challenge the transfers, he escalated dramatically. I felt sick, remembering how Michael had praised me during those early months for being so trusting about financial matters, and refreshingly different from paranoid wives who micromanage their husbands' business decisions. He'd been conditioning me to ignore red flags by framing financial awareness as a character defect. There's more," Isabella continued, opening a second laptop. "Michael has been systematically embezzling from client accounts to fund these offshore transfers. Elderly investors who trusted him with their retirement funds." She showed me account statements that made me want to vomit. Eleanor Rodriguez, 78, missing $340,000 from her late husband's pension. Robert Kim, 82, missing $290,000 from his retirement fund. Dorothy Williams, 73, missing $180,000 from her savings account. But here's what makes this a federal case," Isabella said, pulling up email records that Daniel had obtained through his cybersecurity contacts. "Michael has been documenting his psychological manipulation techniques in writing. He keeps detailed records of how to make victims doubt their own perceptions." She read from printed emails between Michael and his business partner James Morrison. "Victoria asked about the Rodriguez transfer today, told her she was being paranoid, and suggested therapy for trust issues. She apologized within 2 hours and thanked me for being patient with her emotional problems. The conditioning is working perfectly." The words hit me like a physical blow. Michael hadn't just been stealing money and gaslighting me, he'd been documenting his success at psychological torture, like a scientist studying lab rats. My first recording attempt failed. I admitted remembering the humiliation from 3 months ago when I'd tried to capture one of Michael's cruel lectures about my financial irresponsibility. The device's battery had died after 6 minutes, and I'd spent days convinced that technology failure was a sign I was too incompetent to fight back effectively. "That failure saved you," Isabella said firmly. "You became more systematic, more careful. The evidence you've gathered since then is comprehensive enough to support both criminal charges and civil asset recovery." I showed Isabella my own documentation, detailed journals of every financial conversation, every cruel comment, every time Michael had made me apologize for asking reasonable questions about our shared money. The journals had started as a way to remember conversations accurately after realizing I was beginning to doubt my own memories. Look at this pattern, I said, pointing to entries from last summer. He tells me we can't afford the $400 art supply order because money is tight, then spends $3,200 on client dinners the same week. When I mention the inconsistency, he says I'm too emotional to understand business expenses and makes me apologize for questioning his priorities. Isabella nodded grimly. Classic financial control combined with systematic gaslighting. He's been training you to accept his version of reality even when it contradicts obvious evidence. My phone rang, Michael calling for the 7th time since yesterday. I'd been ignoring his calls, and his voicemails were becoming increasingly desperate and revealing. Document this, Isabella advised. We need evidence of his response to losing control. The voicemail was Michael at his most manipulative. Victoria, sweetheart, I'm genuinely worried about your mental state. This silent treatment isn't like you, and I'm concerned you might be having another episode. I know you're upset about our discussion the other night, but abandoning you was therapeutic. I was helping you develop independence and resilience. Please call me back so we can work through this like rational adults. He's trying to reframe abandoning you in a storm as relationship therapy, Isabella observed. That level of psychological manipulation indicates he's been using these techniques for much longer than 3 years. As our meeting concluded, Isabella handed me a thick folder. These are financial records going back to when you were married. I think you'll find some disturbing patterns in how Michael has been managing your personal assets without your knowledge. That evening, I spread Isabella's documents across my hotel room floor, the same floor where I'd been assembling evidence for months. Now I could see the complete picture of Michael's systematic financial abuse. The routine paperwork he'd had me sign over the years weren't joint account updates or tax documents. They were transfers of my grandmother's inheritance into accounts I couldn't access, changes to life insurance policies that removed me as beneficiary, and investment decisions that moved our assets into increasingly complex offshore structures that only Michael understood. I'd been signing away my financial independence one document at a time while Michael praised me for being so trusting and not like those suspicious wives who made marriage difficult with constant questions. Most devastating was a document dated 6 months ago that I'd never seen a power of attorney giving Michael complete control over my assets in the event I was declared mentally incompetent. The document bore my signature, but I had no memory of signing it. Had he forged my signature? Had he drugged me and made me sign while I was impaired? Or had he simply lied about what the document contained when he'd presented it for my signature? I called Daniel, my voice shaking. I found something. Michael has power of attorney over all my assets if I'm declared mentally incompetent. But Dan, I never signed this document. At least I don't remember signing it. Bring it to Catherine tomorrow, Daniel said. If he forged your signature, that's another felony charge. If he tricked you into signing by misrepresenting what it was, that's fraud. Either way, we've got him. As I painted late into the night a new piece called Invisible Chains, I realized tomorrow's meeting with Catherine Morrison would reveal the full scope of Michael's crimes. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt something approaching excitement about my own capabilities. The woman Michael had trained to be passive and grateful was learning to be investigative and relentless. His greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating my intelligence, it had been underestimating my capacity to document his crimes with the same systematic precision he'd used to commit them. Catherine Morrison's law office felt like a fortress of justice, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of Michigan Avenue, where Michael Parker was about to discover his carefully controlled world was collapsing. I sat across from Catherine's mahogany desk, watching her review 11 months of evidence with the focused intensity of a surgeon planning a complex operation. This is the most comprehensive documentation of financial abuse I've encountered in 18 years of practice. Catherine said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd never lost a case that mattered. Your husband believed he was creating the perfect victim, someone too psychologically damaged to fight back effectively. Instead, he created the perfect prosecutor. She activated her digital recorder and played my audio from the harbor abandonment. Michael's voice filled the elegant office cold and calculating. Maybe freezing by the lake for a few hours will teach you to appreciate what you have, instead of questioning every business decision I make for our family's benefit. A jury will find that voice chilling, Catherine observed, making notes in the margins of her legal pad. The calculated cruelty, the complete absence of concern for your safety in dangerous weather conditions, it reveals someone capable of systematic psychological torture. I showed Catherine the latest evidence I'd gathered during my clandestine return to our penthouse, receipts for expensive jewelry purchased during business trips when Michael had claimed to be attending professional conferences, credit card charges at romantic restaurants for 2 during evenings when he'd told me he was working late, and hotel reservations under false names that corresponded with dates when he'd supposedly been traveling alone. He's been conducting multiple simultaneous lives, I explained, spreading the documents across her desk. The devoted husband managing our finances responsibly, the trusted investment advisor caring for elderly clients' retirement security, and the single man pursuing affairs with at least 2 different women. 3 women, Catherine corrected, sliding a document across the desk that made my stomach drop. Daniel's investigation uncovered a 3rd relationship, Rachel Martinez, a colleague at his investment firm. Hotel receipts show he's been maintaining simultaneous affairs while convincing each woman that she was his only extramarital relationship. The scope of Michael's deception was staggering. He hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he'd been conducting an intricate web of lies that required enormous mental energy to maintain. No wonder he'd seemed increasingly stressed and controlling over the past year. There's something else, Catherine continued, opening a thick legal folder marked confidential. Michael has been planning to divorce you for over 18 months, but not through conventional proceedings. He intended to have you declared legally incompetent due to mental illness, which would allow him to control your assets while presenting himself as the devoted husband caring for his unstable wife. She showed me printed emails between Michael and Dr. Marcus Webb, the corrupt psychiatrist. Patient exhibits classic symptoms of delusional paranoia regarding financial matters. Recommend immediate psychiatric intervention before her unfounded accusations damage client relationships and business reputation. I'd never met Dr. Webb, never been evaluated by him, never even heard his name before this moment. But Michael had been encouraging me to seek therapy for months, claiming my suspicions about money and emotional reactions to normal business decisions suggested I needed professional psychological help. The timing was crucial. Catherine explained, her expression growing darker as she reviewed the documents. Michael planned to file commitment papers next month, claiming you were mentally unstable and potentially dangerous to yourself. He would have been granted temporary control of all marital assets while you fought the psychiatric evaluation from a locked facility. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Victoria, I'm driving to Sarah's gallery right now. I know you've been selling paintings behind my back. This betrayal of trust needs to be addressed immediately. Catherine read the message and smiled with grim satisfaction. He's panicking. Your silence has broken his psychological control, and now he's making desperate moves that will strengthen our case significantly. Should I be worried about him confronting Sarah? I asked, feeling a flutter of genuine fear. Michael's text had an edge of barely controlled rage that I recognized from his worst moments. Sarah has been briefed by Daniel about potential harassment, Catherine assured me. She knows to document any threatening behavior and contact police immediately. Michael is walking directly into another trap. 25 minutes later, Sarah called with exactly the news Catherine had predicted. Your husband just stormed into my gallery demanding I stop selling your work without his explicit permission. When I explained that you're a legal adult who doesn't need spousal consent for business transactions, he became verbally abusive and threatened to sue me for facilitating his wife's mental health crisis. Did you record the conversation? Catherine asked, putting the call on speaker. Every word, Sarah confirmed. He claimed you were having a psychotic breakdown and that your paintings were evidence of psychological instability that proved you needed immediate psychiatric intervention. He also said he was your legal guardian and had authority to make decisions about your artistic career. Catherine added Sarah's recording to our rapidly growing evidence file. Michael is systematically destroying himself with each desperate attempt to regain control. He's providing us with real-time documentation of his abusive tactics. That evening, I returned to my art studio, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, complete confidence in my own judgment and perceptions. Michael's frantic attempts to undermine my art career and question my sanity were no longer landing as intended. Instead of making me doubt myself, his desperation was proof that I'd been right to trust my instincts about his deception and financial crimes. I worked on a new painting, The Reckoning, showing chains breaking apart in brilliant golden sunlight, while a woman stood tall and unafraid. As I painted, I thought about tomorrow's emergency court hearing, where Judge Patricia Goldman would hear evidence of Michael's crimes and decide whether to freeze his assets and grant me legal protection from further harassment. But more importantly, I thought about the fundamental transformation happening inside me. The wife, who'd been systematically trained to apologize for asking questions, was evolving into someone who asked harder questions and demanded complete, truthful answers. The artist who'd been told her work was worthless was building a successful career despite systematic discouragement and financial sabotage. Michael had spent over 2 years conditioning me to believe I was weak, naive, and dependent on his superior intelligence and business expertise. Tomorrow, he would discover that his greatest achievement in psychological manipulation had been teaching me to document his crimes with the meticulous precision of someone who'd learned not to trust her own memory without written proof. The trap was closing around Michael Parker, constructed not from my desire for revenge, but from his own compulsive need to control and diminish everyone who trusted him. He'd created the evidence that would destroy him and the victim, who would ensure he faced consequences for every cruel word and stolen dollar. As I cleaned my brushes and prepared for tomorrow's battle, I felt something I'd almost forgotten: excitement about my own capabilities and future. The woman who'd been abandoned in a storm was about to become the storm that washed away everything Michael had built on the suffering of others. Judge Patricia Goldman's courtroom felt like a cathedral where truth would finally be spoken and justice would finally be served. I walked down the center aisle at 9:00 a.m. sharp, flanked by Catherine Morrison and Isabella Chen, carrying boxes of evidence that would either vindicate my sanity or confirm Michael's claims that I was a delusional woman manufacturing elaborate conspiracies. Michael was already seated at the defendant's table with Maxwell Sterling, a lawyer known for helping wealthy men hide assets during contentious divorces. Michael looked different than he had just a week ago. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping. When he saw me enter with my legal team, his confident expression cracked slightly. For just a moment, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine fear. Good, I thought. Now you know how it feels? Your Honor? Catherine began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never lost a financial abuse case. We have audio evidence of Mr. Parker deliberately abandoning his wife in dangerous weather conditions, as well as comprehensive documentation of systematic financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit psychiatric imprisonment. She played the recording from Montrose Harbor, Michael's voice filling the courtroom with calculated cruelty. Maybe a few hours alone by the lake will teach you to stop questioning decisions that are too complex for your artistic mind to understand, Victoria. I watched Michael's face go pale as his own words condemned him. Sterling whispered urgently in his ear. But Michael shook his head dismissively, the same gesture he'd used countless times to silence my questions about suspicious financial transactions. Furthermore, Catherine continued, Mr. Parker has embezzled over $850,000 from elderly client accounts and hidden $2.3 million in offshore accounts during systematic preparation for divorce proceedings designed to leave his wife financially destitute and psychiatrically imprisoned. She presented bank documents, transfer records, and the emails between Michael and Dr. Webb, planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. Judge Goldman reviewed each piece of evidence methodically, her expression growing darker with every page. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened, and Special Agent Maria Santos from the Securities and Exchange Commission entered with 2 federal agents. The sound of their footsteps on the marble floor was like thunder. Michael's head snapped around, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine terror in his eyes. "Your Honor," Agent Santos announced, "we have warrants for the arrest of Michael Parker on charges of wire fraud, elder abuse conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment." Sterling jumped to his feet, his professional composure cracking. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. We had no notice of federal involvement." "So is stealing $850 from elderly people's retirement accounts," Judge Goldman replied coolly. "Gentlemen, please wait until we conclude this hearing. Mr. Parker isn't going anywhere." But Michael wasn't listening to the judge or his attorney. His eyes were fixed on me with a look of pure rage that made my blood run cold. I recognized that expression. It was the same face he'd shown me during his worst moments of psychological cruelty, magnified by desperation and public humiliation. Suddenly, Michael stood up and lunged toward our table, his face twisted with fury. "You manipulative bitch!" he screamed, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "You orchestrated this entire conspiracy. You're the real criminal here. You've destroyed an innocent man's life." 2 bailiffs immediately restrained Michael while Sterling tried desperately to control his client's outburst. I felt a moment of genuine terror. Michael looked capable of physical violence in a way I'd never seen before. But Catherine's steady hand on my arm reminded me that I was surrounded by people who wouldn't let him hurt me anymore. "Mr. Parker." Judge Goldman's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Control yourself immediately, or I will add contempt charges to your growing list of legal problems." Michael's breakdown continued, his voice getting higher and more desperate. She recorded private conversations. She invaded my privacy. She manipulated everyone against me with lies and manufactured evidence. "So you admit to having those conversations?" Judge Goldman asked with raised eyebrows. "You admit to abandoning your wife in a storm and embezzling client funds?" Sterling physically pulled Michael back to his seat, but the damage was catastrophic. Michael had just confessed to his crimes in open court in front of federal agents who would add his words to their criminal case. Given the evidence presented and the defendant's courtroom behavior, Judge Goldman announced, "I am granting the emergency protection order. All marital assets are frozen pending federal investigation. Mrs. Parker is granted exclusive use of the marital home and temporary support of $8,000 per month. Mr. Parker, you are ordered to maintain a 1,000-foot distance from your wife." $8,000 a month. Michael exploded again, his voice echoing off the courtroom walls. "She doesn't need that much money. She's trying to financially destroy me out of spite." "Mr. Parker has hidden millions in offshore accounts," Judge Goldman responded dryly. "I'm being generous by not holding him in contempt for his outburst." As federal agents moved to arrest Michael, the courtroom doors burst open again. This time, it was Sophia Martinez, one of Michael's affairs, still wearing her work clothes from the investment firm, her makeup streaked with tears. "He lied to me about everything," she screamed across the courtroom, pointing at Michael. "He said he was already divorced. He said you were mentally ill and making false accusations about his business." Special Agent Santos approached Sophia immediately. "Ma'am, we'd very much like to speak with you about your relationship with Mr. Parker and any financial information he may have shared with you." The complete destruction of Michael's carefully constructed world was happening in real time before my eyes. His assets were frozen, federal agents were arresting him for multiple felonies, and his mistress was volunteering to testify against him. The psychological control he'd maintained over multiple lives was collapsing simultaneously. As they led Michael away in handcuffs, he turned back to look at me one final time. The man who had tried to break me through systematic cruelty and Storm abandonment, was now broken himself, facing decades in federal prison for crimes he'd committed, while convincing himself he was superior to everyone who trusted him. Walking out of the courthouse with Catherine Isabella and Daniel, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete safety. The man who'd made me doubt my own sanity, who'd stolen my money and mocked my art, who'd abandoned me in dangerous weather to teach me respect, would never hurt me again. But as we reached the courthouse steps, I realized my journey was far from over. Michael's arrest was just the beginning of a legal process that would expose the full scope of his crimes and help his victims recover what he'd stolen. More importantly, I was beginning to understand that surviving abuse wasn't just about escaping it. It was about ensuring other victims had the tools and support they needed to escape their own situations and rebuild their lives. The woman who'd been abandoned by Lake Michigan had found her voice and her strength. Now she needed to decide how to use both to help others weather similar storms. 3 weeks after Michael's arrest, I received a phone call that shattered every remaining assumption about the man I'd married. The caller was Nathan Parker, a 24-year-old law student at Northwestern University, and his voice carried an unmistakable resemblance to the man now sitting in federal custody awaiting trial. "Mrs. Parker, I believe Michael is my father," Nathan said, without preamble, his voice shaking slightly. "I saw the news coverage of his arrest, and I need to meet with you. There are things about his crimes that directly affect me, and I think I might be able to help your case." I remembered the photograph I'd discovered in Michael's wallet months earlier, the faded picture of him with a young boy that he'd claimed was his nephew. Looking at that photo now, with Nathan's voice in my ear, I realized Michael had been lying about even his most basic family relationships. We met at a quiet coffee shop in Evanston, far from the media attention surrounding Michael's case. Nathan looked exactly like a younger version of his father, the same dark hair, the same intense brown eyes, but without the calculating coldness that had become Michael's dominant expression. "My mother is Linda Harrison," Nathan explained, sliding a manila envelope across the table with hands that trembled slightly. "She was Michael's secretary at his first job after college. She's been receiving monthly payments from him for 24 years, supposedly for child support, but she never told me who my father was." The envelope contained bank records showing regular transfers from Michael's business accounts to Linda Harrison, $2,500 per month for over 2 decades. But the payments hadn't come from Michael's legitimate income. They'd been funded through systematic embezzlement from his elderly clients, Mrs. Rodriguez's missing retirement money. Nathan said, his voice breaking with emotion. "Part of it paid for my undergraduate education at Northwestern. Mr. Kim's pension fund. That money put me through law school." The cruelty was breathtaking and somehow perfectly characteristic of Michael. He'd been using stolen money from elderly victims to support the son he'd hidden from everyone, including his wife. But even worse, he'd apparently been planning to use Nathan as part of his escape strategy if his crimes were discovered. "There's something else." Nathan continued pulling out printed emails between Michael and offshore lawyers. "He was establishing trust accounts in my name, planning to transfer millions of dollars to me as gifts that couldn't be seized by federal authorities. He intended to disappear, fake his death, or flee the country, then contact me later to access the hidden money." I studied the emails, seeing Michael's systematic long-term planning revealed in cold legal language. He'd been preparing to abandon me to face criminal charges as his supposed accomplice while he rebuilt his life using money stolen from victims like Mrs. Rodriguez and Mr. Kim. "Nathan," I said, carefully studying his face for signs of his father's manipulative nature. "Did you know any of this about the stolen money, the offshore accounts, the plan to use you as a financial escape route?" "Nothing," he said firmly, meeting my eyes directly. "I thought my father was dead. My mother told me he died in a car accident when I was 2 years old. She said the monthly payments were from a life insurance settlement that would continue until I finished my education." Nathan's voice carried genuine anguish that seemed impossible to fake. "I've been researching the dates of my tuition payments and they correspond exactly to when Michael's elderly clients reported missing money. My entire education was funded by theft from people who trusted him with their life savings. What do you want to do about it? I asked, still unsure whether to trust him completely. Nathan opened a second folder with documents that took my breath away. I want to liquidate every asset connected to me and return the money to Michael's victims. I've calculated that roughly $320,000 of stolen funds went to my support and education over the years. I was impressed by Nathan's apparent integrity, but also deeply suspicious. Michael was a master manipulator who'd spent decades perfecting the art of deception. Could this be another elaborate scheme? Nathan, I have to ask directly, is this genuine remorse, or are you trying to protect yourself from potential criminal liability? Nathan met my eyes without flinching. Both. I'm terrified that I might be charged as an accessory after the fact, even though I genuinely didn't know where the money came from. But more than that, I can't live knowing my success was built on the systematic suffering of elderly people who trusted the wrong person with their retirement savings. Over the following weeks, Nathan worked with Isabella Chen to trace every dollar that had supported him back to its original victims. The process revealed the full scope of Michael's long-term criminal planning. He'd been stealing from clients for over a decade, using some funds for his affairs and lifestyle, while methodically setting aside other money to support his hidden son. But Nathan also provided crucial insight into Michael's psychological methods. He analyzed me too, Nathan said, showing me documents from Michael's personal files that made my skin crawl. He kept detailed notes about my personality, my relationship with my mother, my career goals. He was planning how to manipulate me when the time came to involve me in his schemes. The psychological analysis was chilling in its clinical precision. Subject exhibits strong moral compass, potentially problematic for future operations. Mother's influence has created ethical constraints that would need to be systematically undermined. Recommend gradual introduction of moral relativism through business mentorship opportunities. Michael had been planning to corrupt his own son's ethical development to make him a more useful accomplice in financial crimes. The man who'd spent years telling me I was too emotional and too naive to understand complex moral issues had been preparing to destroy his child's moral foundation for personal profit. I won't let him use me, Nathan said with quiet determination that reminded me of my own resolution 11 months earlier. Even from prison, even through intermediaries, I won't be part of his schemes anymore. Nathan's cooperation helped federal prosecutors build an even stronger case against Michael. His testimony about the systematic nature of the embezzlement, combined with his willingness to return stolen funds, created a compelling narrative about the full scope of Michael's crimes and their impact on both direct victims and unwitting beneficiaries. But working with Nathan also taught me something profound about healing from abuse. Michael's manipulation hadn't just affected me. It had damaged everyone who trusted him, including the son he'd claimed to love. Nathan's choice to reject his father's legacy and work actively for justice showed that recovery was possible even for people deeply connected to the perpetrator. Meeting Nathan also resolved one of the mysteries that had haunted me throughout my investigation. The mysterious photograph in Michael's wallet, the secretive phone calls, some of the unexplained expenses. They hadn't all been about affairs with other women. Some had been about a hidden family that Michael had been supporting through criminal activity, while convincing me we couldn't afford basic expenses like art supplies or home repairs. As Nathan prepared to testify at Michael's criminal trial, I realized that my husband's greatest weakness hadn't been his arrogance or his greed. It had been his fundamental inability to understand that people could choose integrity over self-interest, justice over family loyalty, and truth over comfortable lies. Nathan Parker was living proof that even someone raised on stolen money could choose to become part of the solution rather than perpetuating the problem. His transformation from unwitting beneficiary to active advocate for victims gave me hope that my own journey from victim to survivor could ultimately help others escape similar situations and rebuild their lives. 8 months after Michael's arrest, I walked into the federal courthouse for the first day of his criminal trial. The media attention had intensified dramatically. News vans lined Federal Plaza, reporters shouted questions I didn't answer, and photographers captured every step of my journey from victim to key witness in a major financial fraud case. I wore a navy blue suit that projected professional competence and authority, nothing like the designer dresses Michael had chosen for me during our marriage, always selecting clothes that made me look younger, more fragile, and less intellectually capable. Today, I needed to appear as what I'd become: a successful artist and businesswoman, capable of understanding complex financial crimes and psychological manipulation. Michael sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his once perfect appearance completely deteriorated. 8 months in federal custody had aged him dramatically. His hair had gone completely gray, his face was gaunt and hollow, and his posture showed the defeated slump of someone who'd finally run out of schemes and excuses. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw a flicker of his old manipulative calculation, as if he still believed he might find an angle to escape consequences through charm or intimidation. But there was also something new and deeply satisfying: genuine fear of the woman he'd tried so systematically to destroy. Assistant U.S. Attorney Miguel Torres presented the government's case with methodical precision. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Michael Parker didn't just steal money from his clients and his wife. He systematically destroyed people's ability to trust their own perceptions, convincing elderly victims they were developing dementia when they questioned missing funds, and training his wife to believe she was mentally unstable when she discovered his financial deception and emotional abuse. Torres played recordings of Michael's cruelest psychological manipulation, his voice echoing through the formal courtroom. "Victoria, darling, you're being paranoid again about money that doesn't exist in the first place. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Webb about these financial delusions. They're getting progressively worse and more concerning." Hearing those words in the formal setting of a federal courtroom surrounded by jurors and legal professionals, I realized how completely Michael had poisoned my ability to trust my own judgment and perceptions. For months, I genuinely believed I might be developing serious mental health problems because I couldn't reconcile his explanations with obvious evidence of missing money and suspicious behavior. Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez testified first, her 78-year-old voice strong and clear despite her age. "Mr. Parker convinced me that I was losing my memory when I asked about $340,000 missing from my late husband's retirement account. He said I had authorized the transfers but forgotten due to early-stage dementia. I began to believe I was going crazy." "Did you ever authorize those transfers?" Torres asked gently. "Never," Mrs. Rodriguez replied firmly, looking directly at Michael. "But Mr. Parker was so convincing, so professional and authoritative. He showed me documents that looked official and spoke about complex investment strategies I didn't understand. When I questioned him further, he suggested I needed immediate medical evaluation for memory problems. 12 more elderly victims testified over 3 days, each describing similar patterns of financial theft disguised as sophisticated investment management, followed by systematic psychological manipulation designed to prevent them from seeking help or reporting obvious crimes. Nathan Parker's testimony was particularly powerful and emotionally devastating. "My father didn't just steal money to fund his lifestyle and affairs. He systematically planned to use me as an unwitting accomplice in his escape from accountability. He analyzed my personality, documented my psychological weaknesses, and developed specific strategies for corrupting my moral development to make me more useful for future criminal enterprises." When my turn came to testify, I walked to the witness stand, feeling something I hadn't experienced during our entire marriage: complete confidence in my own perceptions, memories, and moral judgment. "Mrs. Parker," Torres began, "can you describe how your husband controlled your access to financial information and your ability to question his decisions? He convinced me that asking questions about our money was a symptom of mental instability," I said, looking directly at the jury with steady eye contact. "When I discovered unexplained expenses or missing funds, he would tell me I was being paranoid or too emotional to understand complex business decisions. He systematically made me believe that financial curiosity was a character flaw that proved I was psychologically unfit to participate in adult decision-making. How did this psychological manipulation affect your behavior over time? I stopped asking questions about anything financial. I started apologizing profusely for having legitimate concerns. I began to doubt my own memory when he denied conversations I knew had happened just days earlier. He was systematically training me to accept his version of reality even when it contradicted obvious documented evidence. Torres showed the jury my secret recordings, my detailed journals, and the photographs I'd taken of suspicious receipts and documents. Why did you begin documenting these interactions so meticulously? Because I was starting to believe I might actually be losing my mind. I admitted feeling the emotional weight of those terrible months. I needed written proof of what was really happening so I could distinguish between his lies and my actual memories and perceptions. During cross-examination, Maxwell Sterling tried to portray me as a vindictive wife seeking revenge through false accusations and manufactured evidence. But his strategy backfired spectacularly when he played one of Michael's recorded conversations to demonstrate my supposed irrational suspicions and emotional instability. In the recording, Michael's voice was condescending and psychologically cruel. Victoria's sweetheart, successful wives don't interrogate their husbands about routine business expenses like paranoid investigators. Maybe you should focus on your little hobby paintings instead of pretending to understand financial matters that require actual intelligence and professional expertise. The jury's expressions showed immediate disgust at Michael's tone and words. Sterling had accidentally proven the prosecution's point about systematic psychological abuse more effectively than any government witness could have managed. On the trial's final day, Michael took the stand in his own defense against his attorney's desperate advice, according to courthouse rumors. His testimony was a catastrophic disaster of arrogance, self-pity, and continued psychological manipulation. I was a successful businessman, providing a comfortable, luxurious lifestyle for my wife and responsibly supporting my son. Michael claimed his voice carrying the same condescending tone I'd endured for years. Victoria became increasingly unstable and paranoid over time, making wild, unfounded accusations about normal, legitimate business practices. I was the victim of a vindictive woman's elaborate revenge fantasy designed to destroy my reputation and career. Torres's cross-examination systematically destroyed Michael's defense. Mr. Parker, you testified that your wife was mentally unstable and incapable of rational thought. Yet she successfully documented your crimes with meticulous precision over 11 months, gathered comprehensive evidence that led to federal charges, and built a successful art career while conducting this investigation. Does that sound like the work of someone mentally incompetent? She manipulated everyone against me. Michael insisted, his composure beginning to crack under pressure. She's extremely cunning when it comes to psychological manipulation and deception. By recording your own words, by photographing receipts you left in your own pockets, by documenting bank transfers you made and using your own accounts and signatures. Michael's composure cracked completely under the pressure. She had no legal right to question my financial decisions. I was protecting our family's economic security through sophisticated investment strategies. Everything I did was for her ultimate benefit, even if she was too emotionally unstable to understand or appreciate my efforts. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, wire fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, spousal financial abuse, and attempted false imprisonment, Michael's legs buckled and he gripped the defendant's table for support. Judge Patricia Goldman sentenced Michael to 18 years in federal prison without possibility of parole, plus full restitution to all victims, including substantial damages for psychological harm and therapy costs. As federal marshals prepared to escort Michael back to custody for the final time, he turned toward me with one last desperate attempt at psychological manipulation. You've destroyed an innocent man's life, Victoria. I hope you can live with what you've done to someone who loved you. But his words no longer had any power over me. The woman who'd once apologized for asking questions about her own money looked back at him with complete emotional detachment and replied, I can live with Justice Michael. The question is whether you can. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Rodriguez hugged me tightly with tears of gratitude. Thank you for showing all of us that we were stronger and smarter than we knew. Nathan shook my hand with genuine respect. My father spent his life believing that cruelty was power and manipulation was intelligence. You proved that real strength comes from helping others heal and rebuild their lives. Walking down the courthouse steps with Daniel, Isabella, and Catherine, I reflected on the complete transformation from the woman who'd been abandoned by Lake Michigan to the person who'd just helped convict a serial financial predator and psychological abuser. Michael Parker had spent years perfecting the art of psychological manipulation, believing himself intellectually superior to everyone who trusted him. But he'd made one fatal miscalculation. He'd assumed that breaking someone down psychologically was the same as destroying their essential strength and capacity for recovery. The woman he'd left shivering by the lake had risen from that experience stronger, smarter, and more determined than he'd ever imagined possible. And in rising, she'd lifted others with her, ensuring that his victims received both justice and the validation that their suffering had been real, undeserved, and ultimately overcome. 1 year after Michael's conviction, I stood in the renovated warehouse space on Chicago's near North Side, watching contractors install the brass nameplate that would define my new life purpose, the Phoenix Foundation, Financial Abuse Recovery and Prevention Center. The name came from my painting series documenting the journey from victim to survivor. But more importantly, it represented the possibility of rebuilding something beautiful and meaningful from complete psychological and financial destruction. The foundation had grown from a simple conversation with Dr. Sarah Chen, the trauma therapist Catherine had recommended after Michael's trial. You survived systematic psychological torture specifically designed to destroy your sense of reality and self-worth, Dr. Chen had said during one of our sessions. That terrible experience, as horrible as it was, gives you unique insight and credibility for helping other survivors recognize and escape similar situations. I keep thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez and the other elderly victims, I'd replied, staring out at Lake Michigan from her office window. They trusted someone who specifically targeted their vulnerabilities and used their trust to destroy their financial security and mental health. How many other people are trapped in similar situations right now, believing they're going crazy, when they're actually being systematically abused? That question had consumed my thoughts for months. Michael's crimes hadn't been unique aberrations, they were part of a widespread pattern of financial predation that targeted vulnerable people through systematic psychological manipulation and gaslighting. The Phoenix Foundation's mission became comprehensive: provide legal assistance to victims of financial abuse, offer forensic accounting services to trace hidden assets, create safe housing for women escaping financially controlled relationships, and develop educational programs to teach recognition of financial manipulation tactics before they became entrenched. Our first client was Maria Santos, a restaurant owner whose husband had systematically gambled away her business earnings over 3 years while convincing her she was too emotional about money to understand their household finances or make rational decisions about her own business. He told me exactly the same things your husband told you, Maria said during our initial consultation, her voice shaking with recognition. That asking questions about missing money was paranoid behavior, that successful wives trusted their husbands' financial decisions completely, that my concerns about disappearing funds proved I needed psychiatric help for my obsessive tendencies. Working with Maria, I realized how precisely Michael's tactics matched those used by financial abusers throughout the country. The gaslighting techniques, the systematic isolation from support systems, the gradual assumption of complete financial control, these were standard methods used to trap victims in abusive relationships while making them believe they were willing participants in their own destruction. Isabella Chen had joined the foundation as our lead forensic accountant, bringing expertise from dozens of financial fraud cases. The technology aspect is absolutely crucial now, she explained to our first training session for lawyers and social workers. Modern abusers use smartphone apps to monitor their victims' spending in real-time location tracking, to control movements and social interactions and social media surveillance, to isolate them from potential supporters, and identify people who might help them escape. This was a new dimension of financial abuse that Michael's case had only begun to explore. Contemporary predators could exert unprecedented control through digital tools that made detection and escape significantly more difficult than in previous generations. Sofia Martinez, Michael's former mistress who'd testified courageously at his trial, had become our victim outreach coordinator. Her experience being systematically deceived by Michael gave her unique credibility and insight with other survivors who felt ashamed about being manipulated. I understand what it's like to be told you're the only one who truly understands him, that his wife is mentally unstable and malicious. Sofia explained to our weekly support groups. He made me believe I was rescuing him from a vindictive woman who was trying to destroy his reputation, just like he made his wife believe she was paranoid for noticing obvious lies and financial discrepancies. Nathan Parker had graduated law school and joined the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, specializing in elder abuse cases. His work with the foundation helped us understand the intergenerational impact of financial crimes, how predators like Michael damaged not just their immediate victims, but entire families and communities through systematic deception and betrayal. My father viewed every relationship as an opportunity for exploitation and personal advancement. Nathan told a conference of family lawyers and social workers. His wife, his clients, his son, his mistresses, we were all tools for advancing his criminal schemes and feeding his psychological need for control. Recovery means learning to see relationships as sources of mutual support and genuine care, rather than potential advantages to be manipulated. By our second year of operation, the Phoenix Foundation had helped 200 women escape financially abusive situations, recovered over $3 million in stolen assets through legal action, and trained 600 legal and social service professionals to recognize and combat financial manipulation patterns. But our work also revealed how widespread and sophisticated the problem had become. Financial abuse was present in 89% of domestic violence cases, yet most legal and social service systems lacked specialized knowledge to address it effectively or help victims rebuild their economic independence. The psychological damage often far exceeds the monetary theft. I explained to a legislative committee considering new laws to protect financial abuse victims. When someone systematically convinces you that your perceptions are unreliable, that your concerns are symptoms of mental illness, that your questions prove you're ungrateful and psychologically unstable, the recovery process involves rebuilding your fundamental ability to trust your own judgment and make independent decisions. My art had evolved significantly alongside my advocacy work. The Phoenix series now included 50 paintings documenting different stages of recovery from financial abuse, from the initial recognition that something is wrong, through the terrifying process of gathering evidence to the gradual rebuilding of confidence and independence. Sarah Chen had organized a traveling exhibition called Breaking Free Art as Testimony that raised both awareness and funds for victim services while giving survivors a visual language for experiences they'd struggled to articulate to family members and legal professionals. Your paintings give people words and concepts for experiences they couldn't previously explain, Sarah observed at the exhibition's Chicago opening. Seeing their trauma reflected in professional art validates their pain and shows them that beauty and meaning can emerge from the worst possible experiences. The most profound healing came from letters I received from women across the country who'd read news coverage of Michael's case and recognized their own experiences in my testimony and interviews. One letter from Jennifer Walsh in Portland particularly moved me. I thought I was going crazy when my husband told me I'd authorized expensive purchases I had no memory of making. Reading about your secret journal gave me the idea to start documenting our conversations word for word. Last week, I discovered he'd been drugging my morning coffee with mild sedatives to create memory gaps that made his financial lies seem plausible. Your courage to speak publicly about psychological manipulation gave me the strength to gather evidence and file for divorce. These letters reminded me daily that surviving abuse wasn't just about personal healing and recovery. It was about using that survival to help others recognize and escape similar situations before the damage became irreversible. 3 years after the Foundation's launch, I received notification that Michael was filing an appeal of his conviction. His new attorney claimed that his psychological state had been compromised by the stress of hiding his son's existence, and that this mental impairment should significantly reduce his sentence. The appeal was denied within 6 weeks. Judge Goldman's written opinion stated, Mr. Parker's systematic planning, meticulous documentation of his psychological manipulation techniques, and sophisticated criminal enterprise demonstrate clear mental competence and premeditation. His crimes were not impulsive mistakes caused by psychological distress, but calculated actions designed to exploit vulnerable people's trust for personal profit. Reading that decision, I realized my journey from victim to survivor to advocate had reached a new stage of completeness. The legal system that had once seemed impossibly complex was now validating my experiences and expertise. The art career Michael had mocked as worthless was funding comprehensive services for hundreds of other survivors. The psychological tactics he'd used to control and isolate me had become educational tools that helped thousands of people recognize and resist similar manipulation. Michael Parker had tried to destroy me through systematic cruelty, financial theft, and attempted psychiatric imprisonment. Instead, he'd created someone far stronger and more purposeful than the woman he'd married, someone who understood his methods well enough to teach others how to defend against them. The phoenix had truly risen from the ashes, carrying others with her into the light of justice, healing, and renewed hope for the future. 5 years after Michael's conviction, I received a phone call that brought me face to face with the deepest complexities of healing forgiveness and the long-term impact of systematic deception. The caller was Dr. Linda Harrison, Nathan's mother, and her voice carried the weight of decades-old secrets finally demanding to be revealed. "Victoria, I need to meet with you urgently," Linda said, her voice shaking with emotion. "There are things about Michael that Nathan doesn't know, things that might help your foundation's work, but could also destroy my son's faith in everything he believes about his childhood and family history." We met at a quiet restaurant in Lincoln Park, not far from the penthouse where Michael and I had lived during our marriage. Linda was a petite woman in her early 50s with graying hair and the careful composure of someone who'd spent decades managing difficult truths and protecting others from painful realities. "Michael didn't just abandon you and steal from his clients?" Linda began sliding a manila envelope across the table with trembling hands. "He's been systematically destroying people's lives for over 25 years. I have documentation of everything, crimes that go back to before Nathan was born." The envelope contained evidence that made Michael's crimes against me seem almost minor by comparison. Forged insurance claims, elaborate identity theft schemes, fraudulent business partnerships, tax evasion, conspiracies, all conducted while he maintained his public image as a successful and trustworthy investment advisor and family man. Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, studying Linda's face for signs of deception or manipulation. Linda's careful composure cracked, revealing raw pain and decades of suppressed guilt. "Because I've been watching Nathan work with your foundation, and I see how proud he is of helping financial abuse survivors and bringing criminals to justice. But he doesn't know that his father's crimes go back to before he was born, and that some of his earliest support money came from insurance fraud involving people who actually died." She showed me documents proving that Michael had filed false life insurance claims on behalf of elderly clients collecting death benefits, while the supposedly deceased individuals were secretly moved to different care facilities under assumed identities, where they could be exploited for years without family members or authorities being able to locate them. "He didn't just steal their money," Linda explained, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He literally erased their legal existence, making it impossible for families to locate missing relatives or for authorities to investigate financial irregularities. Some of those people died alone in facilities hundreds of miles from home because their families had been told they were already dead." The scope of Michael's criminality was beyond anything federal prosecutors had discovered during their investigation. He'd been operating what amounted to a criminal enterprise involving financial kidnapping, identity erasure, and systematic exploitation of the most vulnerable members of society. Linda, this evidence could send Michael to prison for life, I said, struggling to process the magnitude of what she was revealing. Why haven't you come forward before now? Because I was terrified, she admitted, tears beginning to flow freely. Michael made it explicitly clear that if I ever exposed him, he would destroy Nathan's future and frame me as a willing accomplice in his crimes. He had detailed files on both of us, our psychological vulnerabilities, our deepest fears, our complete dependence on him for financial security. She pulled out photocopies of Michael's personal notes about manipulating her relationship with Nathan, written in the same clinical tone I remembered from his files about me. Subjects' maternal instincts can be systematically exploited through threats to child's welfare and future opportunities. Financial dependence maintained through controlled information about college funding sources and career prospects. Emotional control achieved by positioning myself as child's primary male role model and father figure. Reading Michael's methodical analysis of how to psychologically control his son's mother was like seeing a blueprint for systematic emotional torture. He'd turned Linda's love for Nathan into a weapon against both of them, using her maternal instincts to ensure her silence about his expanding criminal activities. There's something else, Linda continued, her voice barely audible. Michael has other children. At least 3 that I know of, possibly more, all with different women, all supported through criminal activity. None of the mothers know about each other or about the full scope of his crimes. The revelation hit me like a physical blow, forcing me to completely reconceptualize my understanding of Michael's life and criminal activities. He hadn't just hidden one son, he'd been maintaining multiple secret families while convincing each woman that she was his only extramarital relationship and that his marriage to me was a business arrangement or act of charity. Do these other women know what their support money came from? I asked. I don't think so. Michael was extraordinarily careful to compartmentalize his relationships and criminal activities. Each woman received carefully crafted stories about his financial situation, his marriage, his business activities. He told me you were mentally ill and that he was staying married out of compassion and legal obligation. He probably told you I was a former employee he helped out of humanitarian kindness. Linda was absolutely right. Michael had described her as a single mother he occasionally assisted for humanitarian reasons, making his monthly payments seem like voluntary charity rather than legal child support obligations. Victoria, I'm dying, Linda said suddenly, her words cutting through my racing thoughts. Pancreatic cancer diagnosed 4 months ago. I have maybe 6 months left, possibly less. I can't take these secrets to my grave, knowing that other victims might still be suffering while their families believe they're dead. I felt a complex mixture of emotions, sympathy for Linda's impossible situation, renewed anger at Michael's continued capacity to cause suffering even from prison, and determination to use this information to help more survivors and bring additional criminals to justice. What do you want me to do with this evidence? I asked. Help me contact the other women. Help them understand what really happened to them and their children. Help their kids process the truth about where their support came from. And help law enforcement find the missing people whose identities Michael stole. Some of them might still be alive. Over the following months, Linda and I worked together to locate Michael's other secret families and investigate the insurance fraud schemes. The process revealed a pattern of predation that spanned decades and destroyed dozens of lives across multiple states. Jennifer Morrison in Seattle, whose teenage daughter had been supported by money stolen from a nursing home's financial accounts. Rachel Chen in Denver, whose son's expensive medical treatments had been funded through fraudulent insurance claims filed on behalf of supposedly deceased elderly clients. Sarah Williams in Atlanta, whose twin boys had no idea their father was a convicted felon, serving 18 years for financial crimes. Each woman's story followed the same psychological template. Michael had presented himself as a successful businessman, trapped in a marriage to a mentally unstable wife, offering financial support for their children while maintaining strict secrecy to protect everyone involved from legal complications. The psychological manipulation had been identical in each case: systematic isolation from potential support systems, financial dependence disguised as generous voluntary assistance, and constant threats about what would happen if his complicated legal and family situation was exposed to authorities or other family members. Working with these women taught me something profound about the nature of healing from systematic abuse. Recovery wasn't just about individual therapy and personal growth. It required understanding the full scope of the predator's impact and connecting with other survivors who'd experienced similar manipulation and deception. We all blamed ourselves for allowing the deception to continue for so long, Jennifer Morrison said during our first group video call with all of Michael's former partners. But seeing the identical patterns in each of our experiences makes it clear that we weren't willing participants. We were carefully selected targets of someone who'd spent decades perfecting the art of exploitation and psychological control. Linda's death 6 months later was peaceful, surrounded by Nathan and several of the women she'd helped find truth, connection, and closure. Her funeral became an unexpected gathering of Michael's surviving victims, united not by shared trauma, but by shared commitment to preventing others from experiencing similar abuse and deception. Nathan spoke at his mother's memorial service. "My father spent 25 years believing he could control people through fear, isolation, and systematic lies. My mother spent her final months proving that truth and genuine human connection are more powerful than any predator's schemes or manipulations." As I left Linda's funeral, I realized that my journey from victim to survivor to advocate had reached a new stage of understanding and purpose. The Phoenix Foundation's work would expand to help not just financial abuse survivors, but the extended networks of people damaged by systematic predators, the children, the family members, the friends who'd been manipulated into enabling crimes they didn't understand. Michael Parker had tried to destroy individual lives through isolated cruelty and systematic deception. His victims had responded by building communities of support, truth, and justice that were stronger than any single person's capacity for destruction. The final confrontation with his legacy wouldn't happen in a courtroom or a prison visiting room. It would happen through the continued work of people who'd transformed their worst experiences into sources of strength, wisdom, and service for others, walking similar paths toward healing and recovery. 10 years after that storm-soaked night by Lake Michigan, I stood before the Illinois State Senate Judiciary Committee, testifying in support of the Financial Abuse Prevention Act legislation that would fundamentally change how our society recognizes and responds to economic control within domestic relationships. The committee room was packed with survivors, advocates, legal professionals, and family members who had worked tirelessly for years to reach this moment of potential systemic change. Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, now 88, but still mentally sharp and emotionally determined, sat in the front row wearing a Phoenix Foundation pin and the pearl necklace she'd bought to replace the one Michael had convinced her to sell for emergency investment opportunities. Nathan Parker sat beside her now, a successful prosecutor specializing in elder abuse cases who had become one of Illinois' most effective advocates for victim rights and financial crime prevention. Honorable Senators, I began my voice carrying the complete confidence of someone who'd learned to trust her own perceptions and judgment. Absolutely 10 years ago, I was abandoned by Lake Michigan by a husband who believed he could break my spirit through systematic cruelty and psychological torture. Today, I speak for the thousands of survivors who have transformed their trauma into a powerful force for justice and meaningful social change. I gestured toward the gallery filled with women whose lives had been completely rebuilt through the Phoenix Foundation's comprehensive services and support programs. Financial abuse is domestic violence in its most insidious and psychologically devastating form. It's a systematic pattern of economic control, specifically designed to eliminate victims' ability to leave dangerous relationships or seek help from support systems. The average victim loses $89,000 to financial manipulation and control, but the psychological damage often takes years longer to heal than the monetary theft. Senator Rebecca Walsh, the committee chairwoman, leaned forward with genuine interest and concern. Ms. Parker, can you explain specifically why current laws and systems are insufficient to address these crimes effectively? Financial abuse typically occurs gradually over months or years using legitimate legal instruments like joint accounts, business partnerships, and family trusts. I explained, drawing from 10 years of direct experience helping survivors navigate inadequate legal systems. By the time victims realize they've been systematically defrauded and psychologically manipulated, the perpetrator has hidden assets in complex offshore structures, destroyed crucial evidence, and positioned themselves as the responsible adult managing finances for an emotionally unstable or mentally incompetent partner. I opened my tablet and displayed comprehensive statistics the Phoenix Foundation had compiled through a decade of operation research and collaboration with similar organizations nationwide. 93% of domestic violence cases involve some form of financial abuse, yet only 14% of victims receive specialized legal assistance for economic crimes. Victims stay in dangerous relationships an average of 7 years longer, when all economic escape routes have been systematically eliminated through financial control and manipulation. Senator Walsh nodded thoughtfully. What specific changes would this proposed legislation provide to address these gaps? Fear. First, mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions when they observe patterns specifically consistent with economic abuse, multiple large transfers to unknown offshore accounts, sudden changes in account beneficiaries without adequate legal documentation, or elderly account holders making highly unusual transactions while accompanied by individuals who control all conversation and decision-making. I clicked to the next section of my detailed presentation. Second, streamlined legal processes for emergency asset protection during abuse investigations. Currently, sophisticated predators can continue moving money throughout lengthy court proceedings, while victims lack sufficient resources to stop the systematic theft. Third, comprehensive victim services, including forensic accounting assistance, specialized legal representation, emergency financial support, and trauma counseling that specifically addresses the psychological impact of systematic manipulation and gaslighting. Finally, enhanced criminal penalties for financial crimes committed within domestic relationships with specific legal recognition that economic abuse causes lasting psychological trauma that extends far beyond simple monetary loss. The committee members spent over 2 hours asking detailed questions about implementation costs, privacy protections, enforcement mechanisms, and coordination with existing legal frameworks. I answered each question drawing from a decade of practical experience, helping over 800 survivors navigate systems that had never been adequately designed to address their specific needs and circumstances. After the hearing concluded, Mrs. Rodriguez approached me with tears of profound gratitude. Michael convinced me I was losing my mind when I questioned his management of my late husband's retirement account. She said, embracing me warmly. If this law had existed 10 years ago, the bank would have been legally required to flag his suspicious transfers and provide me with independent resources to investigate what was happening to my money. Nathan joined our conversation, his expression reflecting both professional satisfaction and personal healing. The legislation won't prevent all financial abuse, but it will make it significantly harder for predators to operate undetected for extended periods while destroying multiple lives. Most importantly, I added, it will validate survivors' experiences at the official legal and social level. So many people blame themselves for allowing the abuse to happen or continuing in relationships where they sensed something was wrong. This law officially recognizes financial manipulation as a serious crime against vulnerable people, not a personal failure or character weakness. That evening, I drove to Montrose Harbor, where Michael had abandoned me exactly 10 years earlier. The pier had been extensively renovated since then, new lighting systems, security cameras, and a small memorial garden for domestic violence victims that the Phoenix Foundation had helped establish through community fundraising and volunteer work. I stood in the same spot where Michael's Range Rover had disappeared into the storm, remembering the woman who'd shivered in the freezing rain while gripping a recording device and desperately hoping her 11 months of careful planning would be sufficient to destroy the man who'd systematically tried to destroy her. That woman couldn't have imagined the journey ahead, months of intense legal battles, years of therapy to rebuild trust in her own perceptions and judgment, the gradual but transformative process of converting personal trauma into a comprehensive system for helping other survivors escape similar situations and rebuild their lives. She couldn't have envisioned the Phoenix Foundation helping thousands of women recognize and escape financial abuse, or testifying before state legislatures to change laws that had inadvertently protected predators for decades. Most importantly, she couldn't have imagined the profound inner peace that would eventually come from realizing Michael's power over her had always been an elaborate illusion maintained through her isolation, self-doubt, and systematic psychological conditioning. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Sarah Chen. Saw the news coverage of your legislative testimony. Your 10-year transformation from victim to respected advocate represents hope for every survivor who believes recovery and meaningful contribution are impossible after systematic abuse. As I drove home through Chicago's evening traffic, I reflected on the completeness of that transformation. The woman Michael had tried to break through systematic cruelty had become someone who changed laws to protect future victims. The wife he'd abandoned in a dangerous storm had created safe harbors and comprehensive support systems for women fleeing similar abuse and manipulation. Michael remained in federal prison with 11 years left on his sentence, still writing occasional letters claiming he was the real victim of a vindictive conspiracy orchestrated by an unstable ex-wife. Meanwhile, every day brought new evidence that his actual victims had not just survived, they had used their survival to build something larger and more meaningful than any individual predator's capacity for destruction. Mrs. Rodriguez had endowed a permanent scholarship fund for women returning to education after escaping abusive relationships. Nathan had established a legal clinic providing completely free services to elder abuse victims. The 3 other women who'd borne Michael's children had created a national support network for families affected by systematic deception and multi-generational financial crimes. Even my sister Melissa, who'd been manipulated into providing family financial information to Michael years earlier, had transformed her guilt into positive action by becoming a certified financial planner, specializing in helping women rebuild complete economic independence after relationship abuse. The ripple effects of surviving Michael's systematic cruelty had created expanding waves of healing education and prevention that reached thousands of people he'd never even encountered or imagined affecting. That night, I updated my journal, a practice I'd maintained religiously since those terrifying early months of building evidence against a husband who'd been systematically training me to doubt my own sanity and moral judgment. 10 years ago tonight, Michael Parker tried to teach me a lesson about power by abandoning me in a dangerous storm by Lake Michigan. He wanted me to understand that I was weak, completely dependent, and entirely at his mercy. The lesson I actually learned was that real power comes from helping others discover their own inner strength and capabilities. True security comes from building systems and communities that protect vulnerable people, not from accumulating resources and psychological tools to control and exploit them. Michael spent his adult life gathering wealth, influence, and sophisticated manipulation techniques to dominate others through systematic psychological abuse and financial control. He lost everything because predators are ultimately defeated by the communities of informed survivors they inadvertently create through their crimes. I spent 10 years learning that the opposite of victimization isn't revenge or bitterness, it's dedicated service to others who need the same healing validation and practical support you found during your own recovery process. Recovery from systematic abuse isn't just individual therapy and personal growth. It's using your survival and hard-earned wisdom to ensure systems change so fewer people experience similar trauma and more survivors receive adequate support for rebuilding their lives completely. The woman Michael had tried to leave powerless in that storm had become the center of a growing network that had changed laws, helped hundreds of survivors, and created new models for addressing financial abuse across multiple states and communities. But more than external achievements, she'd become living proof that healing from systematic manipulation and psychological torture isn't just possible. It's transformative, not just for individual survivors, but for entire communities, touched by their courage, determination, and commitment to preventing others from suffering similar abuse. Michael Parker had created his own nemesis the night he abandoned me by Lake Michigan, believing he was delivering a final lesson in absolute dominance and control. I'd spent 10 years showing him and hundreds of other predators like him exactly what that nemesis could accomplish when armed with truth-genuine community support and an unshakable commitment to ensuring no one else had to weather similar storms alone and without resources. Looking back now with complete clarity, I understand that the most important lesson wasn't about surviving systematic abuse. It was about learning to use that survival to light the way for others walking similar paths toward freedom, healing, and the rediscovery of their own power and worth. If you're reading this memoir and recognizing your own experiences in my story, please know you are not crazy or oversensitive. Your concerns and perceptions are valid and important. Your questions about finances, behavior, and treatment are signs of healthy self-protection, not mental instability. Document everything carefully, share your experiences with trusted friends or family members, and remember that asking questions about your own money and treatment is never a sign of mental illness. It's evidence of appropriate self-care and protection. Most importantly, remember that recovery is not just possible. It's the beginning of discovering who you really are, when no one is systematically undermining your confidence, questioning your sanity, or controlling your access to resources, support, and independent decision-making. The phoenix rises not because the fire wasn't real or devastating, but because something stronger than destruction lives within each of us, waiting to emerge when we find the courage to trust ourselves again. And once you learn to fly above the ashes of what was destroyed, you spend the rest of your life teaching others that they too have wings and the right to use them. Victoria Parker, founder and director, The Phoenix Foundation, Chicago, Illinois, October 2025.